Just a quick note before we start this review video. I bought my bag of clay off of Glaze Queen, and it was not clear to me that I was buying porcelain clay. So the clay is a Cone 6 porcelain clay with 1% absorption. The speckles in it are ilmenite, so they work better with glazes and are less reactive to pinholing and things like that. So you'll see me struggling in this video, and obviously at the end we have a lot of pieces with cracked bottoms, and that is largely because I didn't realize this was porcelain, not stoneware. It's less forgiving, etc., 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 and not as great for throwing off the hump. So so just a note, if you're getting into this clay, know that it needs a little bit of special care and a real attention to thickness and not overusing water when throwing with it. Hello everyone, Sarah here at Three Little Potters, and today I am reviewing Dragon Fruit Extreme Blue Clay. This is the most expensive bag of clay I've ever bought in my life. I got this on the 4th of July sale, and even with the $10 coupon, I believe it cost me $55 to get this 25-pound bag of clay here in Maine. But I'm ready to get into it and tell you my thoughts on it. I did throw some last night because I was anxious to see how it was going to be, and honestly, my hair from the humidity was like, I know some people have like cute humidity hair, a little bit curly, a little bit flying away. Mine am like chunk here, kind of baldish looking here. It's like, it's not the cute look, it's the untamed woman of the forest look, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, Anyway, I'm having a better hair day today, so we'll try this out. It feels fairly soft, but not the squishy, non-workable soft. And yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't look that extremely different from other clay when you're first looking at it. And here, let's look right here. No, I've got a reflection somewhere. But you can kind of see like the speckles are not, they're not huge and they're not rough. It's not like working with something with a lot of grog in it where it's cutting up your hand. You can feel the texture, but it's not unbearable. Well, yeah. So I am going to throw just a few little bud vases off the hump here. I'm not doing a huge hump, but this clay does feel like it's soft enough that I could do an easily workable amount. Yeah. Just feel like it wants to absorb the water more than other clays, and that it has a slight tendency to get a little bit more squashy the longer you're working with it. I think it might be a little less of a good clay for throwing off the hump because of that tendency. And sometimes if you have like water running down your column the whole time, by the time you get to the bottom, it's a little bit too squashy to work well with. I also found myself last night as well having a tendency to push it off center. It seems like I'm used to throwing kind of dry, and because it absorbs the water from my hands faster, that I am having to re-wet more, or that I'm often throwing a little too dry, getting too much friction, and then knocking it off that way. So I know there's an adjustment with all new clays, but I did find that this one especially had that. So if you haven't watched me throw bud vases off the hump before, what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of marking where I'm going to cut. So at the very bottom edge of where my base in the vase is, I push straight out and mark that with my finger so that I create sort of a ridge that I can see on the outside so that I'm not cutting through. So that line that I just marked on this is about 1/4, no, 1/8 of an inch below where the bottom of this vase is. So I definitely hope that I don't love this clay because it's definitely too much money for me to really stock in my shop. But that said, I mean, maybe people will really love it and it'll be kind of worth ordering now and then. But for me, if a clay is shipping only and I have no local pickup, it becomes really challenging since I'm mostly a potter in the winter. Not being able to ship things without worrying about them freezing for quite a bit of the year here is really tricky. So I think the drag from the texture of this clay is another thing that causes me to, ooh, that's way down further than I thought it was. It causes me to knock off center and throw a bit unevenly when I'm pulling up. It's definitely a clay that requires slightly different technique from B-Mix if you're used to that. I mean, it's definitely, you know, it's easy enough to throw with. I just wouldn't rate it in the top of easy to throw with clays. I was throwing some ring dishes earlier this morning in B-Mix and was like, oh, so nice. Something about every time you throw it with another clay and you go back to B-Mix, you're like, oh, my love for you is renewed, B-Mix. But I think when I'm calculating the materials cost of something like this, that the smaller items that you're making, the easier it is to sort of absorb the cost of something like this. So if I was to make one plant pot that was 10 pounds, it's going to be really hard for me to recoup the cost of this bag of clay. Whereas if I, you know, am able to make 50 bud vases out of the bag of clay, then it's very easy to spread the cost over a large number of items. So just something to consider. And if you've watched my video on selling on Etsy, you'll know I talk a bit about having things that are light enough to ship and easy to ship, and that being the major way that you're able to sell in quantity on Etsy and still make a profit, even with all their fees. And this is definitely the same sort of thing. You know, if you have a very expensive purple glaze with a very expensive colorant in it, if you're using it sparingly, using a cheap glaze on the inside, using that purple as your accent, you know, and then you can get 200 pieces out of a very small amount of it, then it all of a sudden, even though it's a very expensive item, it becomes possible to sort of, you know, have that in your shop and work that with that material. I think, you know, finding things that are cheap that can be your workhorse glaze, things like that really help. And I tend to think of clay as one of the cheaper materials going into pottery. So I don't love when clay is super expensive. And that said, I mean, I'm trying to think of this particular clay is already having some colorant in it, right? It's already kind of doing the work that you would put on a glaze by it being so blue and speckly and cool. So, you know, rather than putting a speckled englobe or a underglaze on this to get that, you're kind of just letting the clay do that work for you. So I kind of should be taking a break from working right now, but I am planning a large family trip to Scotland next year and had to sort of pay for my accommodations a bit more up front than I was thinking I would have to. And so, much like January of this year, I find myself again needing to make a certain amount of pots when I wouldn't normally need to be working quite that hard because my vacation plans have gotten a little out of hand again. My mother-in-law has MacLeod roots and we are going to Dunvegan Castle and I'm pretty excited about that, but yeah, I managed to get us a cottage to stay in on the castle grounds. So that should be really exciting. I don't know if you can see sort of the edge where there's kind of a lot of those little speckles. All right, there you have it. Some bud vases ready to dry for the kiln. Just unloading the Bisque kiln and look at how awesome that blue clay is peeking out. Oh, I wish it hadn't been so finicky. As it was drying, I could see all kinds of cracks on the bottoms of pieces, but it looks super cool. All of my little vases are out of the Bisque kiln and I am going to put some glaze on these. I'm only going to have you watch me glaze a few of the pieces. Well, let's do 10. And the rest I'm going to show afterwards on the photo table so that you can see the glazes up close. So I'll do 10 combos with you and then there'll be even more at the end of the video. All right, I'm going to start with IMCO's Textured Turquoise. And for this one, I've had some crazing with this glaze before, so I'll be interested to see how it works with this clay. Even though it looks like I'm putting on a very thick coat, I am going to go back and do multiple coats on this because I know this glaze likes to be a little bit thicker than what I normally do. I'm also going to try IMCO's Chun Plum, or at least I was going to. Give me a minute, I'll see if I can get that back in working order. This is a glaze that looks really good over dark blue. I've had good luck with it. I believe Indigo Float and Chun Plum, that combo. So I'm kind of wondering if the dark blue base of the clay might give us a little bit of that sort of pink blue look. I know Chun Plum by itself, though, when it's thin, can go a little on the brown side. So hopefully I can get it thick enough to avoid the Chun Plum brown. This is Mako's Milk Glass from the sample set. While this glaze didn't impress me overall, I think the example where it looked the best was on my Speckled Turtle clay. So I'm hoping that it might do something interesting here on this blue. Rhubarb from Coyote's Archie's Baseline. Prior testing of this has come out sort of a very pale pink. I'm not sure if it's going to be opaque enough to hold its own on this dark clay, but I think it's worth a try. And this is Chun Seafoam, the mixed glaze. I'm going to see if I can sort of dip it a little bit in here. I've dipped a bit of my thumb, but again, with all of these, I'm trying to make sure that I've got enough of the raw clay showing because the whole reason to buy this, right, is to show off the clay. All right, Coyote's Gunmetal Green. And these all have the white poured on the inside. Some of them have that a little bit more on the rim than others. Raspberry Mist. I tend to like Raspberry Mist the most when it's over my Studio White, So I'm going to go ahead and use this cup that has that a little bit more liberally applied. And because it's over this studio white, I'm only going to do one coat. So that's ready for the kiln. Except I have nowhere to put it. All right, this is Laguna's Power Turquoise. Considering getting this in a dipping glaze. I may try to formulate my own Val's turquoise and see if I can get it to be a little bit more robust. Lavender Mist is another glaze that I always prefer over my Studio White, so I'm going to go with this one for that. And I'm just going to go with one very generous coat like I did with Raspberry Mist. So that's ready for the kiln. Norse Blue. Yeah, we'll do it on this one. I feel like about 4 years ago, Norse Blue was the biggest trend. It was the glaze that everybody was using, and now I feel like I hardly ever see it anymore. It's still a really awesome glaze, though. Mine is very dehydrated and thick, but I think it'll work anyway. This one has been dipped in Rising Sun Chang, and I'm going to go ahead and put a band of Shipwreck on it. See if I can dig some of those crystals up from the bottom. There we go. I will put a little bit of flux on this. I think I'm going to use Lynette Opal on that one. I'm going to finish some of these up. This is Textured Turquoise going on. Final coat here. This is two really heavy brushed coats, kind of slapped it on. All right, this is some Lynette Opal in this green container here. And I'm just going to go ahead and put a bit of that on here. I feel like that was a little thick. It's sort of a very fluxy glaze, more like a fluxy light beige. I'm also going to put a bit of Lynette Opal on the Chun Seafoam dipped piece, just like that, and that's ready for the kiln. I'm going to go ahead and put Fuzzy Peach on this one. I really like the shape of this one, so Fuzzy Peach is one of my favorite glazes. Last coat of Power Turquoise going on this one. That now has 3 brushed coats. Okay, last coat of Norse Blue here. I only did 2 brush coats, but because it's so dehydrated, it looks more like 4. Hopefully it will run. This is my 3rd coat of Chun Plum going on, and I'm gonna go ahead and do 4 coats of this. Which seems excessive, but sometimes it is needed. This is Milk Glass. That looks thick enough to me, so I'm gonna put that in the kiln like that. One more coat of Spectrum's Ginger. Rhubarb by Coyote. All right, 4th and final coat of Chun Plum. Will it be enough? I hope so. Oops. Try to thicken that one spot. The results are out of the kiln, and yeah, before we get into some glaze combos with this clay, I do want to mention the fact that there is an incredibly high fail rate with this clay. I have never seen such a sensitive clay. It definitely, yeah, most of my bottoms have cracks that do not go all the way through, but they have small stress marks. I would say my fail rate was possibly as high as 50% with this clay. Obviously, when I'm doing a bud vase, they are a little heavier on the bottom. So make sure you're making something that you can trim very accurately. You know, the pieces that are the exact thickness throughout, there was no problem with, but pieces, any slight thickness variation in your piece really, really shows with this. Enough so that once I saw it dry and realized how many pieces I'd lost, I was like, I never want to touch this clay again. And then I saw it come out of the glaze load and was like, why is it gotta look so good? Because it does. It looks good. It performed well with all of the glazes. It didn't really have as many of the pinholing issues that I'm used to with some heavily speckled clays. And it's really pretty, and it's really interesting, rugged clay body. But not for the faint of heart or tight with the purse strings, because it's just, yeah, I, you know, don't have the time and money to be, exactly, yeah, and most people don't, but it's such a fun specialty clay that you might consider trying it, but just be really wary that you need to keep it even, dry it slow, and be prepared to be slightly disappointed with some of your pieces. But let's hop over to the photo table because I tested so many glazes on this clay and I think the results are really stunning. All right, floating ginger. And I believe that was ×3. This is Raspberry Mist ×1 over a dip of Studio White. Just really pretty color. This rim does have texture from the rough clay, but I was pretty much expecting that. Lavender Mist ×1 over Studio White. Studio White really taking on a bluish tone on this clay. This is the dip of Chun Seafoam, and I did have Lynette Opal on that rim. And just love how the speckles show through on the rim. I intentionally did bud vases with this clay because I felt like there was going to be a lot of roughness here, and that's not something I love on a drinking surface. This is Norse Blue ×2 over some Studio White right here. But where the Norse Blue was by itself, I think it looks the best. This was 2 very thick coats of IMCO's Textured Turquoise. Milk Glass, looking very stunning on this clay. No imperfections either. The inside was poured with Studio White. Heavy coat of Chun Plum, 3 to 4 coats. Probably my application was more like what you would get with 4 coats. Ivy, just a dip of it. This was a dip of Rising Sun Chang with a band of Shipwreck. Rhubarb ×3. Surprised at how well Power Turquoise did on this, and I believe this is just the sort of white dip for the inside that kind of pulled down a little bit into the Power Turquoise. As you can see, even this one has that tiny small spot. This is Purple Crawls by IMCO over my June Purple. Gunmetal Green by Coyote. green tea over Studio White with a little bit of Lynette Opal on the rim. Fuzzy Peach along with Sand and Sea. Shallots by Spectrum. Sunrise by Spectrum. These hand-formed dishes were less prone because they were so even. Rose Quartz by IMCO. Rising Sun Chang in Lynette Opal. Chun Seafoam, Floating Blue, and Dirty Snow. Sand and Sea and Fuzzy Peach. Pam's Green. Purple Aster over Studio White. A little bit of flux. Really loving this hint of the speckles of the clay really showing through. This one is just plain Studio White, so you can kind of see how that color changes over the blue clay. So you can really get my dilemma here because the glazing is perfect and looks so pretty, but so many of these are damaged on the bottom because of the clay as well. So I'd love some other people's opinions. Is this temperamental clay worth it because of the amazing glaze results, or is it just too expensive and too upsetting to have that many pieces with problems? I don't know. I feel like in recognizing that it's a clay thickness issue and that it's just very particular, it's almost a question of, well, if you were more careful and more skillful in your throwing, would that be enough? Is it just a skill technicality question? And if you could solve that problem, the glazes look really nice on the clay. You know, I'm pretty much a production potter, so I throw a lot. You know, if those vases were in B-mix, there would have been 100%. They would have all been fine. So does this rugged, interesting clay body outweigh that? I'm just not sure. I may also still sell some of these as seconds. Some of them are perfect, but some of them will be probably heavily discounted in a seconds bin on my Etsy store, probably as, you know, wildflower, dried flower vases or something like that. I might get some sprigs of lavender or something to include in the package. You know, but they are also mostly, I think there's one out of the batch where the S-crack actually did go all the way through the piece, but for the most part it's just, you know, a surface mark on the bottom, and they do hold water, but just not the level of perfection that I like on my bottoms. So it's a toss-up. Yeah. What do you think? Would you give this clay a try? Should I give it another try? Thanks for watching, everybody. I'd love it if you liked and subscribed.